Welcome to Brave Together podcast, an empowering resource for the parents of children with disabilities, neurodivergence, and all unique needs.
When we look at resilience, we look at it as a proactive thing. In fact, we use the term pro-resilience, and we look at it as something that you can build over time. And it's really what we refer to as challenge readiness. And parents of kids who have complex needs, we know there's always another challenge around the corner. And so resilience is really just having the energy, whether you've built it or conserved it or protected it, and having the strategies to be ready for that challenge, whatever comes.
Hi, Brave friends. It's me, Jessica Patay, Brave mom and author, and founder of our nonprofit, We Are Brave Together. On this expert episode, number 226, I welcome Kris Burbank, who shares her journey as a mother of three, including her son, Andrew, who has cerebral palsy. We talk about how Kris's experiences led her to co-authoring a great book on resilience called Embracing Another Normal: Resilience Stories and Strategies for Raising Children with Disabilities. And we get an overview of her research strategies for developing resilience for parents of children with disabilities. I had the opportunity to spend time with Kris at our Boston retreat, and she is fantastic. She is a wealth of knowledge. She has such a warm, big, beautiful heart, and I know that you will love her. A quick reminder to join our free community at wearebravetogether.org to support our growth by rating and reviewing this podcast and sharing episodes that inspire you. And of course, check out our full episodes weekly on the We Are Brave Together YouTube channel. Kris and I had such a nourishing conversation full of food for thought. We get so much advice as caregivers that sometimes I know we just totally tune it out. But I hope you'll find Kris's advice very approachable and not overwhelming. Now, please enjoy my conversation with the grounded and experienced trailblazer, Kris Burbank. Hi, Kris. Welcome to Brave Together podcast. I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. I know after reading your book and reading all about you that you have a lot to teach us today. And I'm so glad that you're one of us. I think, anybody who comes onto the podcast to really teach us, or any of our retreat speakers, when you are a fellow caregiving mom, you have so much street credibility, and I'm excited about today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So everyone, I'm just going to show you Kris's great book. You'll all get it. We'll link it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about her area of expertise. Kris, why don't you just start off by sharing a little bit about yourself and your story?
I am the very proud mother of three adult children now. My middle son, Andrew, just turned 29. He was born 4 months early and has severe spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. So we've been on the treadmill for almost 3 decades. I have a wonderful daughter who's 25 and an older son who's 30. And over those years, I've come into contact with lots of amazing people. So when I started coaching a couple of years ago and was approached by a resilience researcher who is out of Atlanta, Georgia, I said, yes, I'd love to write this book with you. I'd love to apply your resilience building model, which had been used with organizations and academia, and I'd love to apply it to the family unit and specifically to parents of kids with complex needs and disabilities, medical conditions.
So great. Well, was there any particular moment that in your life, in your caregiving life, that sparked an interest in sharing your story and getting into this work? Besides finding out what she was doing, can you attach a particular story or a particular moment that really helped fuel your desire to do this?
I can. And actually, I appreciate the question because I think it helps make sense of what I've done and continue to do. Our kids all came home during COVID. It was particularly disappointing because our son with disabilities had just started his adult life. And so as grateful as we were that everybody was healthy and we experienced that part of history unscathed, it was hard. And my son with disabilities one day woke up, and he's a very positive guy. And it was his birthday. And we had kind of told him, oh, you'll be back in your apartment by your birthday. And he wasn't going to be. He was home for 18 months. He was really upset. And I had this maternal instinct, I guess, to try to turn it around in a way that involved him. And we started talking about all the people in our life and in his life that we would never have met if he didn't have cerebral palsy. And I actually got out a piece of paper and I started to make a list, and it was unbelievable. I think you know these things, and I tend to be a glass half full person, but I had never just done that exercise. And it doesn't take away all the hardship and heartache and all his frustrations and our frustrations. But looking at the list, I realized I've learned a lot from a lot of people. And so when I was approached to write this book, I said, oh, I can tell our story, but really what I can do is contact all these other people and help tell their stories. And that's kind of how it started. We ended up augmenting that with surveys of close to 200 families. And we talked to young people. I interviewed young people themselves with disabilities, but it started with that list.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think anytime we can stop and reflect upon the beauty of this journey is very helpful for the hard moments and the hard seasons. And to do that with your son, how powerful.
It was. And, what you said, I really do think that part of what happens is that when you enter into this, whether it's with a diagnosis or in our case, it was a preterm birth, everything gets dark really fast. You are very aware of what you don't know. You're just scared. And I think over time, what you learn is what you just said, that like the dark and the light, they coexist, right? The hardship and the ease, the laughter and the tears, like all of those things that seem like opposites. In coaching, we call them polarities, but they can be braided or sort of married together, and you realize that's life.
It is life. I think it's really helpful as soon as really any of us human beings realize that they can coexist. They do coexist. It's kind of a relief. It's not this or that, or I shouldn't be sad, or I shouldn't grieve anymore, or, I love my child so much. Why am I feeling this way? Were there parts of the book that were particularly emotional for you to write, or difficult to write, or difficult to share?
So you know this as somebody who's written about your story. I think that it is very therapeutic to write about your life, but I also, because it's both and, I also think that it can be incredibly emotional. And there are a couple of things that happened in the course of my son's life-threatening, those were really hard to write about. And interestingly, writing about his birth was really hard to write about. And he actually didn't really want to read that part. I let him read the book. I really wanted him to read the book because if there were, we talked throughout, but our whole family looked at the book just to make sure everybody was okay, because it's not just my story, right?
Right.
And I will also say that the book deals with 6 challenges that most families go through in some way and kind of applies this resilience model to those challenges. The last chapter was the last chapter I wrote, and it's about planning for the future. And I think that was also a hard one. I think I sort of put it off, like, I don't want to do that one. That's the last one I'm going to do.
That makes sense. That makes perfect. Nobody wants to talk about it. And we have to have a careful plan.
Yeah. And one of the things I kind of discovered in my life, in what I've seen in other families, and in what I've learned from, other people who do work with families, is that future mindset really does require like a mindset shift. Usually, I was talking to a woman the other day, and she has a 25-year-old son, and she doesn't have a will. And, she just couldn't and I said, you're looking, you look at this and you say, oh, it's hard, it's depressing, it's this, it's that. But if you can shift the mindset and say, well, this is a gift. This is a gift to my other kids. This is a gift to myself and my child. I think that's what it takes as you move towards that.
I agree. So let's get into resilience. You have a unique definition. How does your definition differ from the more traditional ones?
So our definition, I wrote the book with Dr. Linda Hoops. She really looks at resilience as something that can be a proactive thing. We say resilience is built. It's not born. And so I used to always think before I met her and before I learned more about this, that, you're either kind of resilient, really resilient. Oh, I'm not as resilient as my sister, but I'm more resilient than my brother, right? But it's a fixed state. And when we look at resilience, we look at it as a proactive thing. In fact, we use the term prosilience, and we look at it as something that you can build over time. And it's really what we refer to as challenge readiness. And parents of kids who have complex needs, we know there's always another challenge around the corner. And so resilience is really just having the energy, whether you've built it or conserved it or protected it, and having the strategies to be ready for that challenge, whatever comes.
So it sounds like really anybody can learn this. Anybody can gain this. It's not like, well, it's just the way I am. I'm just not that resilient, or I just have a harder time than others. These are skills that can be gained, and your book lays it out.
Yeah, and we use a metaphor that I really love, and it's the metaphor of muscles. So if you think about muscles, right, when you do a push-up, you're pushing up against something and there's resistance, and that's how you're building your muscles. And for a lot of us, my triceps are stronger than my quads, or my back isn't as strong as my core. And if you overuse certain muscles, the other muscles are less developed and less useful to you. And so there are 7 resilience muscles, and the goal is not to have all those muscles be like incredibly strong so you can be the poster woman for resilience. The goal is to utilize and develop those muscles so you're sort of in a state of equilibrium, right? So you're not blowing out your shoulder while you're underutilizing, your legs. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
And one of the things that I love is that when people start to read about or learn about these muscles, they very quickly realize, oh, I like that one. That's my comfort zone. This other one I don't use very much. And maybe if I look for ways to use it, right, look for ways to push up, and even small ways, then I can build that muscle. I came across this whole model when I first started coaching, because I use with clients an assessment where we go through and we actually measure your muscles and your predisposition to work in different ways. So, for example, one muscle is positivity. And a lot of people are like, oh, positivity, I don't like that. But really, the way we talk about positivity is that it's just being able to see potential in something. So it's not that you're Susie Sunshine every day when you wake up, right? We hear about toxic positivity, right? I'm not a big fan of toxic. Like, you have to be realistic about what we're facing. But if you can learn to see the possibility in things, you can stay more positive and not get sucked into that terrible vortex of gloom and doom and kind of spiraling downward, which takes our energy and zaps us of the energy we need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The assessment that you're talking about, is that the resilience profile assessment? Okay.
Yeah.
Who came up with that?
Dr. Hoops.
Oh, that's so great. Okay.
And it was originally, as I said, deployed in organizations. So you can think about yourself being in a job and some of these things, right? Because organizations need to be resilient. We need to be resilient at work. But from my standpoint, I think it's unbelievably applicable to the family unit and to parents who are in this, what I would call this constant state of ambiguity. I mean, I think that's one of the, I don't know, I would be interested to know from your perspective as a mom, but I think for us, when we're thrown into this, you have to get kind of comfortable with ambiguity.
You do.
And
you do.
We're not all programmed to be able to do that.
Right. I think when a diagnosis is delivered, you're doing all the what ifs, and then you have to make peace with that. You don't know, where a child is going to land on the spectrum of their diagnosis. You have to accept that. You have to accept that, right now I'm in another season personally of uncertainty because Ryan's about to exit the school district and the next plan is not set up yet. We're working on it. And I could worry myself into a stomach ulcer, but I've accepted that we'll take it step by step. We will figure it out just like we've always figured it out. But it's very hard. And it's hard for Ryan to have this uncertainty. We had a check-in with his psychiatrist, and his psychiatrist was pressing in on that, which was fine. And Ryan handled the questions great. Uncertainty and change is really, really hard.
And I think that's true for a lot of our kids, right? They like routine. They like knowing that juncture between being in school and moving into adulthood it's just such a challenging time for all families, all kids. My son, I remember in his early 20s when he left his transition program and was learning on his own, he said, being an adult is really hard. And we probed, and that was sort of code for, I have all these decisions I have to make, and I'm not capable of doing a lot of these things. And I think you sort of feel like you're in limbo a little bit. But the one thing I will say, Jessica, as somebody who's been where you are, simply at that point in the journey, if you ever would have told me when my son was 13, 18, 22, 24, that when he was 29, he would be thriving in the ways that he is. I wouldn't have been able to even fathom it.
Right.
And I think that's another one of the challenges when you talk about everything from moving through these phases to planning for the future to knowing how hard to push and what kind of expectations. We don't know what to expect.
Right.
But in the same way that we talked about in the beginning, where there's hardship and there's joy, I think there's also surprise. Ooh, and often it's good.
I like that. We need to be reminded of that. And I think, when I look back, there are ways that Ryan is doing so much better than what my worry and fear was telling me, 22 years almost, 22 years ago. Yeah. Thank you for that. I love that. And leave room for surprise.
Well, and also, look, I'm not going to, we have things that we're working on. My son drives a motorized wheelchair, and I said last week, I'm not replacing those headlights again. You banged that thing up and you've broken those headlights, and this is it. We're not doing it again. And if you would have told me 10 years ago, we'd still be having problems with the headlights on the wheelchair and running into things, I'd be really? But I also think when I think about these resilience muscles, for me, one of the ones that I over rely on is structure. When I come up against something, if I can create, my natural reaction is, let's create a plan. Let's have a system. Let's identify the process that works. And I think a lot of moms do that.
Sure.
It's how we get through the day. It's like it becomes our superpower, right?
Right.
And yet there's not always a structure for how to get your kid to grow up and become an adult.
True. What would you say to somebody who is feeling lonely in the journey, and how community contributes to resilience?
So community is huge. There's actually, this muscle that has to do with reaching out. And some of us, when we are confronted with a challenge, we tend to sort of withdraw. And that serves us in some ways, right? We don't hear some of the silly things that people say that are well-intentioned but alienating. But in the end, the research repeatedly points to how important it is, not just for moms of kids who are complex in some way, but even in terms of longevity, right? When you see it with older people, community and things like, joining some of the events and activities, retreats, et cetera, connection circles that you all are doing is essential, because we can share, because we can learn, because we can be vulnerable and not be judged, right? You talk about a safe space and finding a safe space. I've had people tell me repeatedly, parents of kids with challenges, I have to find my people who are parents of neurotypical kids so that I can sometimes just be typical. And I have to find my tribe of parents that I don't have to explain things to. And I think having those kinds of communities, the muscle, the resilience muscle is connection, right? And figuring out what connection you need and then sort of exploring how to get that. And there are so many ways now, right? I mean, one of the things I love about so much of what you do is people don't have to leave their home. They can, right? They can go to an amazing retreat and they can get a break and there's respite. But they also, at the end of a long day, can log on to something, while their kids are in another room, and it doesn't require childcare. So those things I think are really, really important.
Are there any particular muscles that people like to, or like least like to build up or want to ignore?
That's a great question. Yes. So I'll answer that in two ways. There is a muscle that has to do with experimenting.
Okay.
It's one of my weakest muscles. I like to be sure of things. And the muscle of experimenting is really this muscle that enables you to say, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to try this and this might work. And we just did this with my son, who's very interested in exploring the world of dating. He sees his siblings. They have significant others. He would like a connection with somebody. And the concept is terrifying to me, to other people are like, but there are ways to explore this, right? So like recently, he just joined a Facebook group that is for adults 18 and over with cerebral palsy. And we said, great, explore it for a little bit. Then we'll come back.
Right.
Working with his therapist, talking to his siblings, and then where do we go from here? So experimenting is one that I think a lot of moms are not as comfortable with, but there is value. Most things are not irreversible. So I always say to myself and to other people, pick the things that are sort of low risk that you can experiment with. But the other one that is really, really important, and what I find is that moms have a hard time utilizing it, is prioritizing. We want to be able to do everything, and many of us can. But as somebody whose son is about to enter his third decade, I can tell you, I don't have the capacity to do everything that I had 20 years ago. I just don't. And if you would have told me 20 years ago, I would have said, oh, no, it's going to last forever, right? So prioritizing is very, very important, not just for our own energy levels, but for our partnerships with, spouses and teachers and, like I said, our own kids. Knowing what's most important and kind of agreeing to that and focusing on that is a really good one to play around with.
What would you say, Kris, to, a parent, a mom who's listening or who hears about your book and hears about your concept and they're exhausted and overwhelmed. And so another self-help, self-care tool just, feels like too much. Like, I don't have time to read that and study that and apply it. And where do I even begin?
The first thing I would say is you're right. And the second thing I would say is there's no rush. But the third thing I would say is that you deserve this, because even if you are tired now, there will come a time when you have a little more capacity. And even if you've got it all under control now, there will come a time when you may want some other answers. I loved seeing how this book has been used. So I'll just give you two examples. And I look at this and say, this does not add anything to a parent's already busy life. Lots of people are in book groups. Some people are in book groups only with moms of kids with special needs, disabilities, complex medical conditions. I've had book groups who've come and we've divided the book into different ways and they've discussed it. And then they moved on and they read another book that had nothing to do with disabilities. The other thing that people have done is they've used it with their school teams or with their medical teams to say, this is a concept that is interesting. And
how can we apply it in our IEP meetings? How can we apply it in the classroom or with field trips? Especially that whole experimenting thing. If we think moms are focused on knowing and being sure, school districts really don't like experimenting often. Then the third thing I would say is that you don't have to read the entire book. You don't I've taken all the research and interviews and turned them into an online portal for parents. And I always say, you don't have to use all of it, turn a few pages, putz around a little bit. And even if you just find one little thing that you want to play with or that you want to try to incorporate, or like I had somebody say that you want to suggest to your mother-in-law, these are different sort of easy lifts. I completely understand that parents are overloaded, but I didn't want that to get in the way of my sharing something with people that they might find helpful in whatever way.
I agree. And you have at the end of every chapter a list of 10 questions. What's the best way to utilize those as journal prompts? Do you
journal?
I do, not consistently, but I do.
So I didn't used to journal. And then when I went through my coaching program, it was something I started. And I find that there are like journalers and there are anti-journalers. And anti-journalers are usually those people who say, I'm too busy, it doesn't work for me, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand that, right? You do you. We have to do what works for us. The questions are designed for people to just ponder, to talk about with a friend or a sister or a partner or a spouse, or to, pick one or two and just do bullet points or draw pictures of. When I hear myself say this, Jessica, I come back to your question of, I'm too busy. And what I wish somebody would have told me 20 years ago was, you're not too busy to do this kind of thing, because this kind of thing really is just helping you know yourself. And if you know yourself, then you know what matters to you, what triggers you, what upsets you. You know what you're good at and maybe what you're not comfortable at. And all of those things, knowing all those things, helps you to be a better parent, even if you don't do anything with it, right? Just knowing it. And then if you can work with some of the questions and mull them over, then you actually move the needle and you may say, oh, I see this about myself. I'm not as patient as I'd like to be. Not that I need to be, not that I should be. I really try hard not to do that. I think moms we overdose on should and need. So just what I might try to be, what I'd like to be.
I like that language so much because, yes, we should on ourselves so much.
I heard somebody the other day talking about the word shame as an acronym. And you guys have talked about, on the podcast and in other things about the shame that moms feel as we go through this experience with our kids. But in this case, they used shame as an acronym. It stands for should have already mastered everything. And I thought, oh, this is what we all have. We all, for no reason, think, oh, well, I just should have mastered this already. But I don't know why. Like, no one taught me. I didn't go to a training program for it, you know?
We just place such unrealistic expectations on ourselves.
And part of what happens, I think, is that our lives, at least initially with our kids, they reinforce that. So an example I would give is that I am very productivity oriented, right? So I face a problem, I come up with a solution, I motor my way through it. I have whatever system I come up with or identify my resources, and I can do more. Do.
Right. So true.
And that just, that propels us. And then we say, well, that's my MO. That's what I have to be in order to get through this. And we don't have to be that. One of the things I love about We Are Brave Together, when you introduce folks in an email or to be some type of facilitator, you always talk about who they are in life beyond just a parent. We all know we have a huge identity as parents of any child, and especially a child that consumes so much of our bandwidth. But we're also other people. We have other identities.
We do. We do. And we forget that. It's very easy to forget that and just think I'm a caregiver and this is my, my only role. This is the only person I get to be. And we really try to remind moms that you're a woman or you're a partner or a wife, a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, somebody who loves dancing, whatever. There's so many parts of you that you still get to celebrate and enjoy.
And those things, celebrating those things, actually does make you a better caregiver.
It does. It does.
And I know, I have many friends whose kids are nonverbal and they can never have the conversation with their kids that I was able to have with my son. But I remember being at a point in my life where I was trying to figure out Andrew was going to move out. I mean, this is a young man who can't sit up by himself. And we were figuring out, wow, you can be independent. But then what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to my old job? Am I going to go back to school? And I remember my older son saying to me, Mom, you should talk to Andrew. I don't think Andrew would want you to be giving up your entire life for him forever. And I think, we have to give our kids the benefit of the doubt. Even the young people I know who can't verbalize to the degree that my son can, they still feel different when they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s than when they're in their teens. And they want to be able to exercise independence, whatever independence looks like. And we have to think about how do we give them some of that? How do we let go and create the safety net so that we can all thrive?
That's beautiful. And I love that your kid took you aside to tell you that and to ask you that. That's amazing. It really, really is. You must be so proud.
I am proud. I mean, I also just came off a day where the phone was ringing nonstop from him because he had questions and could, so I'm reminded again of we never get to that other place. I think we sort of learn to coexist, and some days are, more independent than others, but there's a lot of joy, and he's proud of himself. And that wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have been able to let him fail and make some mistakes and pick himself back up again. It's scary, but it's important.
It is. It is. And Kris, before we go, is there anything that you want to make sure that you say about resilience or prosilience?
Well, the first thing I would say to people is just don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. I think sometimes we fall in love with our own ways of doing things. But as you said, you're embarking on this next phase. We all know we're going through different phases of life. I always feel like just when you've got one phase figured out, you've moved into the next one. So there's value in trying to be creative and trying to look at how can we do things differently and how might that serve us, right? Another way to think about it is, what habits have I created that are not serving me anymore? They're not serving my family, or they're not serving my child. And then the other piece of this is I would just continue to encourage people to make those connections and build that community and avail themselves to organizations like We Are Brave Together. As you and I were chatting, we didn't have that in the world when my son was really young. And it's beautiful what's been built and what's available to people. And everybody kind of has to find out how to make it work for them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny when I work with coaching clients, one of the things we always talk about is when they identify something that they want to work on or what they want to do. Well, who can help you? Where can you look to for support? How can I help you? And we don't have to go it alone, right? Everybody has aspects of their life that they are going to keep close to the vest. I have experienced it. I understand it. I appreciate it. But we all have things that we can share. And when we share, we know we identify solutions, we feel better, we feel lighter. Life is just better.
I agree. Well, let's show the book one more time.
Thank you.
It's called Embracing Another Normal: Resilient Stories and Strategies for Raising Children with Disabilities by Kris and her co-author, Dr. Linda Hoops. Where can everybody find you, Kris?
KrisBurbank.com. And I have all kinds of free resources. I actually even offer financial aid to people, maybe if you're interested in something that I charge for, but there's a lot of free stuff on there. And I love hearing from parents, and I love hearing stories and connecting with folks. So please reach out.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, this was so great to have this time together. And I also love all our little small world connections too behind the scenes. That was really heartwarming.
The world is a good place, right? I love it when worlds collide.
Take good care, Kris, and we'll keep talking.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thanks so much for listening today. Do us a favor and leave us a review and a rating so that this podcast can get into the ears and the hearts of more and more moms. Did you know that Brave Together podcast is an extension of our nonprofit organization, We Are Brave Together? We Are Brave Together serves an international community of caregiving moms, offering support groups that are virtual and in-person, educational resources, and low-cost weekend retreats. And we have published our first anthology of caregiving stories entitled Becoming Brave Together: Heroic, Extraordinary Caregiving Stories from Mothers Hidden in Plain Sight. It will encourage and validate every parent caregiver. To join us today, go to wearebravetogether.org. Our support and sisterhood awaits you. Brave Together podcast is for entertainment and education purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional care and should not be relied on for medical or mental health advice. The use of any content on our podcast, links, show notes, or on our website is to be done at your own personal risk. Please seek out a professional to assess your own medical or mental health concerns, because we are all beautifully complex and the content of this podcast is for a broad audience.